good afternoon, everybody. My name's Susan Mackenzie. I'll introduce myself because I know there's a lot of new names on here today, people that I don't necessarily know. So welcome. I'm the CEO of the Emergency Services Foundation, and I will begin by paying my respects to the Bunurong people as the traditional custodians of the land where I'm on, down on the Mornington Peninsula. Very wild and windy down here today, not a night for going and looking at the sunset at all, and acknowledge their continuing connection to the land and the waterways. Excuse me. Today we're welcoming the Commissioner for Gender Equality in the Public Sector, Dr. Niki Vincent. And Niki is a great friend of the ESF. She's been working with us for a couple of years on the new Diversity and Inclusion Awards that we began. And as a consequence of working with her on that, and the fact that she was one of the judges of the awards, and she made various comments to me about some of the applications, I said, hey, Niki, I think you need to share some of that wisdom with people. And so we decided to call this session Stop Fixing Women, Gender Equality in Police and Emergency Services. And so, look, I expect Niki's going to spark a whole lot of fresh thinking and challenge some assumptions that people have. And so I'm going to just hand over to you, Niki.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate the opportunity. For the benefit of everyone here, I will send you a PDF of the slides at the end of this, but you won't get my notes. So what I'm saying won't come through. So if I'm saying something that's not on the slide, that's the bit to note if you think that's important. But you will get the slides. And also when I mention a resource or a reference, you'll get a list of those on the slides at the end. So you don't need to put the resources in the chat and that sort of thing. You don't need to be hunting them down while I'm talking to you. All right, so I'm just checking that you can see my slides because I can't see them. Is that you can see them?
Very good. Very good.
Excellent, excellent. And like Susan, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional of the owners of the land. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, acknowledge any emerging leaders as well as any other First Nations people with us today. And I also want to acknowledge the ESF and the outstanding work that you do and the Diversity and Inclusion Awards, which I've had the pleasure with Ro Allen, our Human Rights Commissioner, judging for the last few years. And it is such a pleasure. It's always such a joyful thing to see the incredible work that people are doing. And I really want to recognise that work, the work that's going on across the sector. I've had I have a long-standing relationship with police and emergency services. I did an independent review in South Australia into sexual harassment and sex discrimination in the police force there, SA Police, and I also did a similar review into the Metropolitan Fire Service in South Australia. I was invited by both the Commissioner of Police and the head of the fire service to actually come and do those reviews. And we saw a lot of change as a result of that. I also have a granddaughter who's a serving police officer. So it's police and emergency services are very close to my heart. And I know many of you have been working for years to create safer and more inclusive workplaces, often without recognition and sometimes even facing resistance. And so this session is about supporting you. I've called it Stop Fixing Women because that is the title of one of my favourite books. It's called Stop Fixing Women, and that's by the wonderful Catherine Fox, who is an award-winning author. But I also have other books that I want to recommend to you. One is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, and another one is a new book out by Professor Cordelia Fine, Patriarchy, Inc. And so I'll be using kind of bits and pieces from those three books in general, all of which are available. And in fact, Invisible Women is my very, very favourite book in the whole world. And I reckon everyone should get themselves a copy of that or get it on Audible because it's an amazing book. So, as Susan said, I've been judging the ESF's Diversity and Inclusion Awards for a couple of years, and I really do want to address a pattern that I'm seeing, which is a lot of really great, well-intentioned women's leadership programs that focus on developing women, but with zero evidence that they're moving the needle on actual equality. And so today I want to look at the hard data and discuss why we need to fix the system and not the woman, and that's what actually works. That's not to say that leadership programs aren't important, they are, but I really want to focus on the patterns that I've been seeing over the last few years in these awards. The facts are that although we've seen a lot of improvement, obviously police and emergency service organisations all report to me as Commissioner for Gender Equality in the public sector every couple of years. So I get, I've got currently 80 million data points from the public sector in its broader sense under the Gender Equality Act, which I implement, including from police and emergency services. And the 2023 data shows, we're about to get 2025 data, so there'll be an update, but the 2023 data did show that police and emergency services were making really good strides on some of the gender equality indicators, but they were coming from a very low base or a very high base, depending on which way you look at it. So we did see a big improvement in the pay gap, but the pay gap across that police and emergency services sector is now 10.5%, much more reasonable than it was, but still a long way to go. The pay gap at senior leadership is 12.3%, or it was in 2023. That means that the average man in senior leadership earns $46,000 more than the average woman. So again, the dollars add up. We have seen a 7% increase in women recruits in the sector, but we've also seen this disturbing rise in women exiting, which is up almost 6% to 48%. Are leaving, and when you don't have equality in the sector, that's a lot. So, and it's absolutely no point in increasing the recruitment of women into the sector if you haven't fixed the culture, fixed the issues that hold them back, fixed the sexism, fixed the sexual harassment, because all you're doing is bringing women like lambs to the slaughter if you haven't fixed up the culture of the organisation once they get there, and hence you'll see a large departure of women. The women that stay are often, and I know this from many, many interviews that I've done with people working in the sector, are people who can basically act like the men because that's the way they survive. And that doesn't help our diversity at all. If we're talking about women just behaving as much like men as they possibly can to survive in an organisation. And you'll see that sexual harassment is at 10%. So 10% of people in your sector experience sexual harassment. Now, that's lower than national figures, but it's higher than the average for the public sector as a whole. So still issues, even though, as I say, big improvements have been made. So I just want to invite you to switch your microphone on for a second, Susan, if you don't mind, and tell me who or what's the problem? Like, what is the problem here? What do you think's the problem?
We prioritise being seen to be doing the right thing as opposed to actually doing the right thing.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Naomi, you put your hand up.
Oh yeah, I was just hi. Would love to see early recruit into the CFA, and I'm loving it. But I have noted that a lot of the stuff that I perhaps implemented in when I worked back, say 20 years ago, is still just being rolled out today. And what I mean by that, I think a lot of this stuff should be addressed at induction. I think diversity and inclusion should be a part of when you join any organisation, rather than see it as an add-on module, add-on training. And if you want to change culture, it has to start at the grassroots. And then that culture will start moving in time. And I think that would make a great impact.
Yeah, great. There's lots in the There's lots in the chat, which I'm going to have a look at. Systems built by men for men. Yeah, Niki is hitting all the key spots. No disagreement from me. Command and control mindset. It's a traditionally male-dominated sector. Insecurity and fear from men. Stale at the top. Shuffling of deck chairs that retain and promote poor culture. Lack of flexibility with hours, shifts, working arrangements. Difficult to change. Ingrained attitudes of men. We prioritise being seen to be doing the right thing over actually doing the right thing without accolade. Women still have the burden of childcare. This doesn't allow the acceptance of as many opportunities for women. Flexible workplaces are not as flexible as they make themselves out to be. Men don't see the barriers because they don't experience them. Well-intentioned people, but overly cautious about rocking the boat and upsetting the masses. Lack of accountability for lower-level leaders who block progression. Stigma still present around strength and confidence being interpreted as aggression. Victim blaming. Grooming isn't addressed. Women are told if it's not physical, there's nothing we can do. He can't be removed. Your organisation may be supportive. However, you then move into cross-agency operations where another agency culture then impacts on you. I probably will leave it there, but deeply rooted gender norms about our roles and what skills and attributes are valued, etc., etc. Yes, absolutely. There's no shortage of understanding of what the problem is. But what I do see is that a lot of what is done, and not a lot, but what is coming up in the ESF awards are often leadership programs for women that are about fixing women. And so I really want to address that. Now, that's not, as I said, it's not to say that we shouldn't have leadership programs for women, but we do need to think about the fact that it's not women who are the problem. And so this idea that women are inherently less assertive, risk-taking, or leadership ready really does underpin much of the advice aimed at empowering women. And empowering women, it can be problematic, as I'll talk about in a minute. So this is very much a myth rooted in bias and a cop-out that essentially blames individuals rather than confronting the structural barriers that are the problem, because women are as capable as men generally, but operating within systems that, you know, work against them often. And so we really have to focus on systems changing. Gender equality is structural. It is built into the systems. It's built into the norms. It's built into the institutions. You've alluded to all of that in your comments. It's in the hiring, the promotion, the performance reviews. Those practices, they often reflect unconscious bias. We have leadership standards that tend to reward stereotypically male traits, masculine traits, and penalise others. We don't have true flexible work. You know, and those flexible working roles are undervalued and they tend to limit careers, and it's usually only the women that do them. We've got pay gaps persisting, even in female-dominated sectors. So 1/3 of my duty holders under the legislation are health service organisations, public health organisations, and they often say to me, we are 77% women. Why do we even need to be thinking about gender equality? Their pay gap is 32.2%. So the average man in health, even though they're only, you know, something like 13% of the sector, maybe just slightly more than that, the average man is earning 32% more than the average woman in health. So even in every single occupation in the public sector, there is a pay gap in favour of men, even in those occupations like clerical work, administration work, all the caring professions. Every single one of them has a pay gap in favour of men, because men get a glass elevator instead of hitting a glass ceiling when they go into female-dominated sectors. We see pay gaps persisting because the decision-making power isn't equally shared. And we've got, as you've said, cultural double standards. Behaviours seen as confident in men are seen a different way. Women are seen as difficult or pushy when they exhibit the same behaviours. So women face a no-win situation. If they behave like men, they're penalised for, stepping outside of their gender norms and being unfeminine, being pushy, whatever, aggressive. If they conform to feminine norms, they're deemed that they're not leadership material. And if they step away or opt out, then leadership positions are, just further cemented as men's terrain. So we've really got to think about redesigning systems and not redesigning women. The Fix the Women programs tend to look like this: confidence building workshops, assertiveness training, public speaking courses, negotiation skills for women. Like I said, I'm not saying that these programs are all bad. There's no doubt that every one of us, including me, could use a bit of a spit and polish in some of these areas, but that is not unique to women, mind you. Men could do with a bit of spit and polish in those areas as well. And I'm going to talk mostly about men and women today. I don't have a lot of data on people who identify as non-binary or self-described. We are building that data, but there isn't a lot of research. We do see that there are problems with the data that we have got, but we'll gradually build that over time. And the problem is that that many of these leadership programs reinforce the deficit model of women. Many, if not most, leadership programs targeted at women start from a flawed assumption that women need to fix themselves to fit into systems designed, as one of you said, by men and for men. They're often aiming to boost the confidence, teach negotiation tricks, help women speak up or lean in, or coach them to be more assertive or strategic. And so the subtext is, if women just changed themselves or acted more like men, they'd succeed. But this really does misdiagnose the problem, which isn't women's behaviour, but the structural inequality in the workplace design. There's some brilliant research about the reality that faces women, and there's a great book by Dr. Sabrina Cohen-Hatton. It's called The Gender Bias, and in it she talks a lot about gender stereotypes and particularly about risk. She's a firefighter in the UK, and so is her husband. And when people hear what he does for a living, the response is typically, "That's amazing, you're so brave." And when he adds that she's a firefighter too, in fact, she's his boss, the response changes to, "But isn't that dangerous? What about your kids?" So, same job, different gender, judged totally differently. And if people take a risk that doesn't work out, they're judged more harshly for their failure if they're women than if they're men. In a study, psychologists used the hypothetical scenario of a police chief failing to send enough officers to manage a protest in the city. And when the police chief was a woman, participants in the study evaluated them more negatively and questioned their competency, much more so than when the police chief was a man. When women reach a high status position in a job that isn't traditionally associated with their gender, even minor errors can really be quite damaging in their careers. In fact, women are judged more harshly in terms of their future success. In another study, people reviewed information about fictional employees, their background, their education, their career, their histories, and their performance ratings, and the only difference was in the gender of the employees. All the other details were identical. The participants in the study were asked to rate how successful these fictional people would be, and they'd also asked to rate how they felt about having them as their boss. And while successful women were rated as just as competent as successful men, women were less likely to be put forward for upper management. And they had a likability penalty. They were disliked directly for being successful while occupying a traditionally male space. While women can be successful and likable in career, in a career that's considered normal for a woman, such as nursing, in a male-dominated field, women often have to choose between being liked and being successful. And here's the kicker about that study. The participants who rated these fictional employees, well, half of them were women. Negative gender stereotypes about women are held by both men and women, and that's really important for us to all appreciate. Most of us have unconscious bias towards women. We are all brought up in a patriarchal society. We all have pictures in our head that come to us, even though we try not to when we think of leader or we think of doctor or we think of surgeon, because we've grown up in a patriarchal society. Most of us expect women to be less expert than men, and so we're less willing to be influenced by women. And this is an example of implicit or unconscious bias. We all, as I said, have some form of unconscious bias as a result of our environment and our social conditioning. You can test out your own biases by looking for Googling Project Implicit from Harvard's free online test. I'll have a reference to that at the end. I did this about 15 years ago now, before I was Gender Equality Commissioner in Victoria, or my previous role, Equal Opportunity Commissioner in South Australia. I did it when I was running a leadership organisation, and I did it in the privacy of my own home to find out where my biases were. And what I found all those years ago was that I was indeed quicker to associate leadership words with men's pictures of men, and quicker to associate words about caring and so on with pictures of women. I could do that faster than when I was asked to do it the opposite way round, because it was much more natural for me to just do that. And so I found that I had a gender bias. And most of us do. I'm not alone. A study of unconscious attitudes towards male and female leaders found that all groups associate men with leadership and women with support. And this was despite 93% of participants being women and 86% of them identifying as feminists. 86% of them identifying as feminists. So it goes to show the power of socialization and conditioning that shapes our attitudes and behaviours. There's another great book, Marianne Sieghardt's book, The Authority Gap, that looks at this in detail. And she found that authority is knowledge and expertise, being an authority on a subject, and also, leadership, having authority in the sense of having power. And when asked to rate women and men who'd achieved the same goal, 70% of men will rate men more highly. Men are assumed to be competent until proven otherwise, whereas women are assumed to be incompetent until they prove otherwise. Women are more likely, even in the high court. So what a study found was that women high court judges were twice as often interrupted by men while they were presiding over a case in court than male judges were likely to be interrupted. So barristers are much more likely to interrupt female high court judges. This is in the highest kind of authority in the land. Women are still experiencing gender bias. So those conscious and unconscious gender biases and stereotypes can really influence recruitment and promotion and career progression. I'm sure you know this. WGEA, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency at a federal level, found that women have to send a lot more job applications to receive the same number of interviews compared to equally qualified men. And a study at Yale University found that when selection criteria aren't given pre-assigned weights, that managers can subtly shift the importance of certain selection criteria to favour certain candidates, often unconsciously. This is a great example. So, for example, these researchers had a hypothetical role of police chief, and the candidates were Michael, who was streetwise, he was well liked, but he had little formal education. And then the other candidate was Michelle. She was educated and media savvy, but she lacked street-based experience. And participants ranked Michael's experience, that is streetwise, well liked, but with little formal education, as much more important for the role than Michelle's education. But when they switched the names and did it with a new set of participants, so Michelle was the streetwise and Michael was educated, the participants rated the importance of educational qualifications as much more important for the job. So while they might have felt like they chose the right man for the job, in fact, they'd chosen the right job criteria for the man. And I've talked about some of these, but to sum up, common forms of unconscious bias against women include performance bias, so the tendency to underestimate women's performance and overestimate men's. in a recent study, when a woman's name was replaced with a man's on a CV, evaluators were 60% more likely to say that they would hire the applicant. Attribution bias, which is closely linked to performance bias. So women are given less credit for their successes and greater amount of blame for failure, and are generally held to higher standards because, of course, boys will be boys, another stereotype. And in a study on office housework, men who stayed back late to help set up a room for a meeting the following day were rated 14% higher than men who did not, whereas women who stayed back late to do the exact same thing were not rated any higher at all, because women are expected to do that work. The research found that when men help out with the office housework, they're rewarded, and women aren't. But if women refuse to do the office housework, then they're penalised. Well, men are not, because it's expected of us. Also, there's an example of a female police officer. I often speak at the Australian Institute for Policing Management, and I was giving a lecture there, and a woman police officer put up her hand, and she's told me about when she got accepted into the Australian Institute of Police Management program. She was so excited, and she went and told her male boss, and he said to her immediately, they must have needed to meet their gender quota for the program. It was a mic drop moment, really. It goes without saying that when achievements are attributed to luck or meeting gender quotas rather than skill, then it just minimises the hard work that people have done to get there. And then there's something like likability bias, so that women face a social penalty for things that are viewed positively in men, like doing a risky job, as I've mentioned. A lot of women get negative feedback on their personal style, such as they're sometimes too abrasive and pushy. In a study, it found that 66% of women got that kind of feedback, and only 1% of men got that kind of feedback. And then there's maternal bias, which means that women with children are seen as less committed to their careers. Working mothers often get asked about how they're coping, because we always assume that they're not coping. We almost never hear working dads ask that question. You know, I have four children. I've been asked so many times, how did you do it all with 4 children? My partner never gets asked that question. It's never been a question for him. It's often implied or assumed that working mothers must be overwhelmed, reinforcing an unconscious belief that dedicated mothers can't also be dedicated employees, which can then lead to mothers getting passed over for training and promotional opportunities. And then finally, affinity bias, which is a tendency for us to graduate towards people who are like us or who are similar to us. And if you look at all of those kinds of bias and you think about how they can be compounded by being a First Nations person, being a culturally, racially marginalised person, having a disability, being an older person, and so on, then you can see how we can really get some entrenched discrimination. So for me, a lot of women's leadership programs are problematic because they place the onus of change on individual women rather than the onus of change on the institution. With all those biases going on, doesn't matter how much confidence you build in women, unless you fix those structural problems and those biases, those women are going to lose their confidence, because they get out there with their newfound confidence and they get knocked down again and again and again. We can't be training women to adapt to systems that are inherently biased against them. We must challenge the underlying assumption that women need to develop their confidence. They need to communicate more assertively. They need to lean in or manage their ambition better, while the system remains unchanged, because this implicitly sends a message that they aren't succeeding because they're deficient, not because the system is rigged. And so, you know, that's fixing women instead of fixing the workplace. And also, when employers roll out leadership programs for women, they often use them, as someone said in the question time earlier, they use them as a sort of public relations friendly smokescreen for real inaction, right? This is a band-aid that keeps the status quo intact while looking like you're doing something. In other words, symbolic action replaces the systemic reform that's needed. They're often based on gender stereotypes. I can't tell you how often I hear this, that they repackage gender stereotypes about women as if they're really great. So they emphasize women's emotional intelligence or their collaborative leadership style. And that might sound empowering, but it just often reaffirms the idea that women are fundamentally different and should stay in their soft skill lane. And so this entrenches that binary thinking and perpetuates this role segregation. We often hear that men and women are wired differently, and so they have different interests and career aspirations, and that women just aren't interested in leadership roles or the traditionally male-dominated industries, which incidentally are paid much more highly than majority women industries. But those arguments are actually rubbish. A comprehensive review of all the scientific evidence from over 20,000 studies reported in New Scientist found that it is just not true. We do not have predetermined hardwired gender differences in our brains. And so with it, the rationale for the expectations, the roles and achievements of each gender in society is just neuro nonsense. So you can forget the idea that women are inherently better at multitasking, better at emotional intelligence and compassion, and men are inherently better at maths and science and spatial skills. Our brains are a product of the lives we've lived and the experiences we've had, and we are gendered from the moment we're born. So it's not about our predetermined genetic differences. It is about how we're raised, the toys we're given, the occupations that we're channeled into, the sports that we can do, the hobbies that are seen as appropriate for our gender. Boys raised playing with dolls and taught nurturing skills have the exact same capacity for compassion and emotional intelligence as girls. It's really important that we don't kind of stereotype women in these programs. But also the programs often don't quite challenge the criteria of leadership. They're basically failing to question what leadership actually is or how it's defined and rewarded, and they aim to get women to succeed within the current paradigm rather than interrogating or shifting the paradigm itself, the way of thinking about leadership, and which that just reinforces the status quo. And also I argue that they can do harm because of the double bind. Women are told to be more assertive and then they're punished for being too aggressive. They're encouraged to be authentic, then told their communication style isn't effective. And if you keep building women up and then knocking them down, this can increase self-doubt, it can lead to backlash, and it can eventually reduce confidence, not build it, and it will increase burnout as women are encouraged to do more and more in an absolutely rigged game. As I've said, they can be harmful as well because they divert focus from the need for organisational accountability. And Catherine Fox calls this a moral outsourcing problem, where organisations hand the burden of adapting to the very people who are being disadvantaged. So I really wanted to, this is just a reflection, and to ask you to think about that. Now, I know that you're all probably running a lot of other things in addition to women's leadership programs, but I think the same arguments can apply to whatever it is that you're doing. Obviously, some of the things that are being done in your workplaces are working because we are seeing those shifts as I identified at the beginning. But I would love you to think about, and I won't ask you to do it now because I'm seeing the time, a program, a women's leadership program in your own organisation. What was the focus? What changed? So often in the awards, the foundation's awards, what I'm seeing is women's confidence increased or women enjoyed the program. But what I'm interested in is, did it make any difference to them? Are there more women in leadership roles? Are there changes to policy or shifts in culture? Did it change the women, or did it ask women to adapt to the system? Sorry, did it change the system or ask women to adapt to that system? Did it just prepare women to survive hostile environments rather than transforming those environments? And I think those are important questions to ask. Because if your leadership program doesn't touch power structures, then it could well be reinforcing them. And I think that's a really important thing to ask yourself. There's also something I want to mention, which is the merit trap. So policing and emergency services absolutely pride themselves on fairness and discipline and getting the best person for the job. And that's why we so often hear appointments should be based on merit, or no one wants to be picked just to meet a quota. And I absolutely agree that no one wants to lower the bar. But here's the thing. What do we actually mean by merit? In practice, merit's often assumed, not defined. Like, ask someone to explain it. They often can't tell you. It's just as if we should all know what we mean by merit. It can mean different things to different people, and that's risky when we're making decisions about leadership, about promotion, or about recruitment. Often it ends up favouring the person who looks or sounds like the last person who did the job. But in a changing world, that's not always the best person who's equipped to lead in today's environment, let alone in tomorrow's. And in your organisations, often promotion is based on how long you've been in the job and how you've worked your way up the system. And we often find people getting into senior leadership roles without the appropriate training, just because they've been there and done their time. So, that is a real problem. Merit is used in most systems to reward the familiar, not necessarily the most capable. And if we're serious about performance and culture and public trust, we've got to ask tougher questions about what we're actually rewarding. Because women now make up the majority of university graduates in Australia, and they get higher results out of university as well. And yet their starting salaries are on average 9.4% lower than men's, right out of the gate from university. And even when they graduate from exactly the same courses and land the equivalent jobs in graduate programs, so exactly the same jobs, there's still a 4.4% pay gap. So what's going on? Are men just naturally better? Of course they're not. The data tells us something else. We are rewarding behaviours and characteristics that have been shaped by tradition, not necessarily by performance or potential. It's a great study from the London School of Economics, a very prestigious, generally male-dominated organisation, and they had this great study, and they said, and it was about gender quotas, and their basic conclusion was that gender quotas don't over-promote women; they actually reveal underperformance in men that was previously ignored. In emergency services, the risk of sticking with what's comfortable, whether it's equipment, technology, or tactics. If you don't adapt, you fall behind, and the same goes for leadership. If we don't question how we define talent, we risk missing out on great leaders, people who can build strong teams, connect with communities, and think clearly under pressure. This isn't about ticking boxes. It's about building the kind of workforce that the public can trust, one that reflects the community, leads with integrity, and performs at the highest standard. So yes, let's value merit, but let's make sure that we're defining that in a way that genuinely delivers the best, not just the most familiar. So instead of fixing women, fix the systems that hold them back. And there's a wealth of information on what's worked in all sorts of sectors and industries. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency and the Champions for Change Coalition are my go-to sources. We've also got the feminist economist, Professor Leonora Riz, developing a portal where you'll go and be able to go in and find any problem, gender equality problem that you've got in your workplace, and where and what's being done to fix that from all around the world, evidence-based research. But we're building that at the moment. We've also done some really good research that we've published. We've funded some really good research on this, which we've published on our website, and I'll give you the link for that at the end. But the basic thrust of this, and I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, is design as if caregiving was normal. The vast majority of us have some caregiving responsibilities, men and women and people of all genders. We all have people in our lives, even if we don't have children, generally, and we're going to need to be caring. It's a part of life. So assume that everyone will have caring responsibilities, or should have caring responsibilities, even if they have children but don't take care of them, not just women. And so this means flipping job flexibility and evaluation systems so they support life, not disrupt career paths. And then rethink success and job fit. So you've really got to eradicate criteria that presume that we're going to have uninterrupted, always on careers. It's really time to redefine what excellence looks like beyond uninterrupted availability. And then 3, as I've said over and over, push for structural change. Real fairness requires material levers, pay gap investigations and monitoring, job design reviews, workload management, care infrastructure, not just workplace trainings. We've got to have things like transparent promotion practices, bias interruption training for decision makers, flexible work that actually works, available at all levels, including leadership, not career limiting, supported by technology and culture. I can't tell you how many times I've heard in policing, it's too hard. You know, we've got 24/7 operations. Well, so do hospitals, and they manage it. You know, accountability measures, gender targets with consequences if they're not achieved, put into leaders' performance contracts and performance reviews. Regular pay audits, as I said, and really importantly, especially when you've got rising rates of women leaving your organisations, exit interviews that are fully documented and that are researched. So tracking the patterns of why people are leaving, why everyone's leaving, but particularly if you've got that happening more in one gender over another. And then things like culture change initiatives like bystander intervention programs, training everyone to interrupt bias and harassment, focus on allies, not just women. We need men in this game with us. Inclusive leadership development, so training leaders to manage diverse teams, focusing on psychological safety and absolutely addressing unconscious bias in performance reviews. So lots more information there on our website, and I'll give you some references at the end. But I do want to talk about a case study of a leadership program that I've seen has had real impacts, and it's called it's Goulburn Valley Water, so previously male-dominated sector, engineering, full of engineers. And it's so Goulburn Valley Water, the program is called Let's Talk About Gender. It's a foundational six-session program that was developed by Goulburn Valley Water, and one of their senior leaders did a program with Leadership Victoria, or the Williamson Community Leadership Program, and adapted what they'd learned to develop a program for their own organisation. And it was built to build understanding of gender inequality and support system level change. It complements the organisation's Gender Equality Action Plan, and it aims to create a workplace where all staff can thrive. It was originally developed as a leadership course delivered to senior executives, but then after all the senior executives had gone through it and said how amazing it was, they redesigned it for broader staff participation. So it uses research, video content and real stories to promote personal reflection and facilitated discussion. Sessions begin in single gender groups to acknowledge different starting points and different lived experiences, and then participants are then paired across gender lines to share perspectives and build mutual understanding. And when I visited that organisation, I heard from people right across the organisation, and men in particular, about what a profound impact it had had on them. It concludes with a joint session where the staff collectively identify actions to support gender equality in their workplace. And it's really helped create a shared language, deepen awareness of systemic barriers, and offer a practical ways to challenge assumptions and behaviours and hold each other to account. It's not a solution for every issue, but it has laid a really strong foundation for cultural change and ongoing action. And their gender representation, more importantly, has significantly improved over the period that they've been running this program. So in 2015, the executive leadership team was 4 men, just 4 men. As of 2025, the managing director leads a team of 6 general managers, 3 women and 3 men. Similarly, middle management has shifted shifted from just 2 women out of 25 roles in 2015 to now having a 50-50 gender split today. And this transformation has been driven by deliberate structural and cultural changes, but opening up conversations about gender, and that's what this program did, was a crucial first step. So it's helped the organisation lean into what really mattered and explore how to shift the dial. And it also introduced more gender inclusive terms and conditions through its enterprise agreement, supported by education for the negotiating committee. So everyone's had this training and they're all the better for it. It remains one of the first programs of its kind among the water authorities in Victoria, but it really gets a lot of interest from other organisations that are seeking to embed the same meaningful, sustained changes they've achieved. So finally, I just want to talk about measuring what matters. So what I'm talking about here is outcomes. So, you know, the metrics that I'm interested when I'm reviewing your gender equality initiatives in the awards are women getting promoted more? Are they advancing more? Are they staying longer? Are there more women who are in the pipeline for succession plans? Is pay getting better? Is it getting more fair and more equal? Are the pay gaps closing? Is leadership more diverse? Are incidents of sexual harassment going down, and is formal reporting going up? Are men taking more carers leave and parental leave, and are more men working flexibly, including leaders? And those are some of the things that we look for when we're looking at progress in gender equality in our duty holders. And I suggest that when you're running a leadership program, that you set up baseline data before the program starts and track those participants over 2 to 5 years, really comparing outcomes in terms of the things that I've said are important, in terms of does it make a difference to the systemic issues, and then comparing the outcomes to the participants who haven't done the program that are the same gender, and then reporting on those findings transparently. So what can you do next? I think this is a takeaway for you. I'm hoping that this seminar has sparked you thinking about what are you measuring? Are you tracking outcomes, real outcomes, or just activity? What barriers can you remove? Thinking systems, not individuals. What change could you trial? You can start small, but make it structural, and how you're going to track your progress. So setting clear measures and following through. Here's the resources that you don't need to take them down. As I said, I'll send you the slide. And here's how you keep in touch. And it looks like we've got 10 minutes for questions, Susan. So yeah. Over to you.
You must need a double gin and tonic after that. You hardly drew breath. I need a double gin and tonic to sort of taking it all in. You know, I really sparked up when you mentioned the Australian Institute of Police Management, because I was there many years ago, probably 25 years ago. I was the only woman in a group of men, and I have never felt more bullied in all my life.
Wow.
And it's really stuck with me.
Oh,
It was absolutely incredible. I'm going to kick off, just to let everybody know, we will do an e-news, and in that e-news we will link Niki's slides into that, and you'll get all of this information. So as Caitlin's put in the side there, if you're not on our e-news mailing list, go to the website now and register, and you will get the e-news in the next couple of days with the slides and the resources and everything there. Niki, I'm going to kick off a question, and we're just doing a program now ourselves at ESF on lived experience storytelling. Okay, and that's about mental health, because that's our focus. So I've actually got 2 questions for you. The first question is, what role do you mentioned it slightly with the Golden Valley Water, but what role do you think storytelling and lived experience plays in shifting culture?
Well, my personal experience, and I'll give you a case study in that. When I became the Equal Opportunity Commissioner in South Australia, we had the equivalent of a male Champions for Change group, as it was at the time. So that was a group of male CEOs who were gathering to become champions for gender equality. And I sat around my first meeting table, and I was absolutely shell-shocked. I heard the most outrageous things, and I wondered, what on earth are we doing here? And I cannot possibly have my name with this group because it's embarrassing, the kinds of things that they were saying. In fact, someone raised, Caroline Hewson was there with me at the same time, and she saw the look on my face. She was managing the group until they got a commissioner in place. And afterwards she said to me, "Oh my gosh." And we had a comment, we had someone doing a presentation on family violence, and one of the senior CEOs said, "Oh, that's a personal issue. It's not a workplace issue." Believe me, they went through a lot of training after that. But I also brought the equivalent number, and I got them to agree, the equivalent of number of women CEOs into that group. They were called the something for Chiefs for Gender Equity. That's right, not the Champions for Change. So I brought these women into that group, and just we did an introductory session with the women. The first meeting, they were welcomed and so forth. And then the women started to talk about why this was important to them. And these were all CEOs, and every one of them had the most incredible story about discrimination, about sexual harassment, about pay inequality. One was the only female CEO in a particular industry sector in Australia, and they'd just done a pay review, and she had found out she was paid $100,000 less than the next lowest paid male CEO in that sector. And they gave her an immediate pay rise, but that had been years that she'd been doing it. Every single one of them. Now, this is a group of privileged women. Obviously, they've made it to the top. But these men sat there with their mouths open, and suddenly they were interested. Suddenly they didn't know everything. They had to ask questions. They could relate to the experiences these women were talking about because they hadn't had them, and they knew that these women were at the same level as them. So it can be really, really powerful. And I've seen that. That's just one example. I've seen that in so many examples. One of the things that we did with SA Police, we uncovered the most horrific stories of sexual harassment, and particularly predatory sexual harassment. So more senior men perpetrating sexual harassment on more junior women. And we ended up, at the police request, developing a restorative program where we trained the police commissioner and all of the senior executive police, all the deputy commissioners, et cetera, and their senior executive, in order to hear the stories of these women that had this happen to them, not because they were going to get any compensation, but because these women wanted it to change and to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. And that was we had some of these men in tears hearing the stories, even in the role-playing program where we taught them to hear these stories, because obviously it was an incredibly complex program to run. We had to vet the people that wanted to do it to make sure they weren't going to be damaged in any way by reliving this and, dealing with that. But it was the most incredibly powerful program to hear those stories. And I'm certain it had lasting impacts.
Absolutely. So my other question I wanted to ask you, of course, Emergency Services Foundation is all about promoting mentally healthy workplaces and mentally healthy workforces.
Yeah.
What impact does this sort of inequality that you've been talking about today have on people's mental health and well-being?
Yeah, look, it has a dramatic impact. I mean, just me talking about it, I'm so sure. I mean, I get kind of angry when I'm talking about it. I'm in the position of feeling like I'm in an incredibly privileged position, because I can turn my anger into powerful change with the work that I'm doing. But if you're not in that kind of position where you can make that change, it can have an incredible impact. I mean, I'm not even going to go into sexual harassment, because I think I mean, that goes without saying. That's a work health and safety issue that needs to be 100% on the top of every organisation's agenda. But it is still rife in emergency services, and it's devastating. I've seen that firsthand as Equal Opportunity Commissioner in South Australia. But if you work your butt off and you don't get promoted, and it's unfair, every single one of us can think of situations where we've been treated unfairly, men or women, people of any gender, and we know how devastating we can't sleep. We think about it all the time. Well, this is women's daily reality. And if you've got sexual harassment on top of that, even if it's just, throwaway lines and the occasional kind of low-level sexual harassment, if you're getting that day in, day out, that can have a massive effect on your mental health. So absolutely, striving for equality from a mental health perspective is crucial, absolutely crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've got time for one question if somebody wants to quickly put their hand up. I think everybody's just blown away, Niki.
Everyone needs a gin and tonic now.
Everybody needs a gin and tonic. I'm looking out the window here. It's so grey and horrible, and I just want to snuggle up at home. Look, I can't see any hands coming up there, but look, there's one. Gianna.
Yeah.
Hi, Gianna.
I've got a few questions, Niki, and quite long ones. So I guess my main question is it okay for us to contact you? And I think you had your email on the chat there. So if there's questions that we can ask you, are you happy to get an email about that?
Absolutely, yeah. Now, just know that it is. I can take complaints of systemic gender equality issues under the legislation, but I can't take individual complaints. So the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission is the best place to go for that. But if you want to reach out around anything I've talked about today in terms of what to do, where to go, absolutely, and I can point you in the right direction. I've got it's me and 13 people in my team, so it is a tiny team with a huge agenda, but we will do the best we can to respond to your questions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we might finish it there, and I'll finish by saying that this came about because of the event that ESF runs every year, the International Women's Day event. And if you haven't been to it, try and get a ticket through your agency this year. And if you're not lucky enough to be one of the ones sponsored by your agency, come anyway, and I'm sure you can claim it on your tax. And it's always a fantastic event, and people go away feeling very inspired. And part of that is that we do these awards that Niki refers to, the Diversity and Inclusion Awards, and there's 3 categories of those awards, and we just would absolutely love to see your applications coming in. And I know that Niki would love to see some improvement in how people present those based on what she's spoken about today. So yes, we can absolutely see and feel and know Niki's passion, and she's such a wonderful speaker. And thanks so much, Niki, for sharing. And we will send everybody who has been registered for this the e-news. And if you want that ongoing, please do register. There's a lot going on at the Emergency Services Foundation that I'm sure you'd be interested in. So go well, everybody. Have a safe night, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.